Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of The Authentic Physician, where we uncover the truths about medicine and how women physicians are navigating medicine and restoring trust in the worlds that they are in. Today, I am pleased to have with me Dr. Alexandra Stockwell. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
It is my pleasure to have you. I've followed Dr. Stockwell peripherally for a couple of years, and I'm just fascinated with the work that she's doing. Many of our listeners are women or people who love women, and they know very well that it is tough to be a woman in today's world. Whether you're working at home or outside the home, you're balancing lots of competing demands. And one of the things that doesn't always have the most talked about space in our world is how do you fit in intimacy and connection and sexual exploration within your relationship, and how do you do that when you're doing everything else? Dr. Stockwell is an expert on this, in my opinion, and I would love to give you a moment, Dr. Stockwell, just to start us off. Why did you get into this area of medicine, and what do you love about it? Tell us your story.
Let's see. Well, when it comes to my story, I really could start with the fact that my parents were divorced when I was 9 years old. And I met my husband the first week of medical school. He's also a physician. His parents were divorced when he was 6. And our relationship was good, beautiful. We fell in love. And when we got married during medical school, it was this kind of odd thing that on the one hand, I was full of hope and genuinely knew he was my person. And on the other hand, I just was sure that we would get divorced because there was some part of me that really couldn't, I didn't have like internal permission to imagine it any other way. Now, obviously, that was not the loudest part, or I wouldn't have actually gotten married, but it was there from the beginning. And I got married in 1996 before iPhones, and people have video cameras, but I didn't have one. And we just didn't record like we do now. And so, actually, when my first child was born, during medical school, I I used to kind of like sit back and take internal snapshots, like make a point of remembering how well we got along so that in the future, when we were divorced or there was trouble, I would be able to share with my daughter very genuinely how well her parents had navigated life together and how happy we were when she was young. Like this is a truth inside me. Fast forward, we've been married for, I don't know, 10 or more years. And I thought, oh, we might get divorced. Now I feel super confident that that is never going to happen. I've been married for coming up on 30 years. But I thought, well, we might. Like, I don't know. I'm not arrogant enough to predict the future. And I don't know if you're listening, if you're aware of the statistics. 50% of first marriages end in divorce, 60 to 67% of second marriages. Like, this is not just some random paranoia. There's lots of good reason not to be arrogant and assume, however happy I was on my wedding day, that what that meant about the future. But anyway, at a certain point I thought, oh, things are good. Maybe they will last, but I better figure out how to really make them wonderful. And another piece of this is that when we got married, we were both in medical school. We had children early. My second was just before my internship. And what all of that is pointing to is that we were both working 60, 70, 80, sometimes 90, 100 hours a week, changing diapers. And we never had a phase where we really had time to just enjoy one another. We didn't go for a weekend getaway because there always was an exam the next Monday, or it was just an intense time of life. And I always assumed that once we had more time together, things would be so special between us because we were having what I call functional sex. I had an orgasm, he had an orgasm, we were happy, but it was absolutely nothing like what poets describe. Afterwards, I didn't feel like this warm, open hearted connection with him. And I just thought, oh, well, once we have more time, then of course this is all going to get better. So fast forward around the same time that I thought, oh, maybe we will stay together. And I better really figure out how this can be as good as possible. Um, that I wasn't working any nights and evenings, and I have 4 children, but I had two and then a big gap before the next two. So I had a phase with no diapers, no nighttime wakings. And my husband mostly was home evenings and weekends. And the point is, we had time together. And nothing really changed. Like, we still had lots of love. We had good collaborative conversations about finances and parenting. But I just felt like, in terms of aliveness, things were a lot more dull than I wanted them to be. And that was really my first kind of like, you know, being hit on the head with an awareness that it's not just more time that we need. We do need time with one another, but it's not just more time. So, this is really the context for my then choosing to do an extremely in depth training in communication, sensuality, and sexuality, which was for both lay people and coaches. And at the time, I actually didn't know what a coach was. I loved practicing medicine and being a doctor and doing it in a way that really had integrity for me. But I was fascinated by how they would teach people to help other people with this. And so I went to the teaching lab and I thought, oh, like, I have come home. And so I went into this training really for my own sake, for the sake of my marriage, and came out of it a coach.
That is so, what I love about it, and as I'm just thinking through this, like, you weren't in a bad place. You were
Oh,
in a
I
good
definitely was
place.
not in a bad place. And in fact, I would say it was above average. I had lots of people in my life who like looked to my husband and me as, quote, couples goals,
Hmm.
like the quality of our conversation and our collaboration inspired people.
Yeah.
But it's really about like how alive,
Mhm.
how intimate, how connected, how internally expansive, how, instead of just having a kind of very pleasant functionality with one another,
Mhm.
our, like, instead of our marriage being a supportive companionship, which it I didn't want to lose that,
Mhm.
but I wanted that to be the starting point.
Yes, not the end. And the way you describe it, I think you called it functional sex.
Yes.
I would venture to say that, just, I don't know that most of our listeners even know that they're getting that, right? And so now you're talking about already hitting that and then going to an even deeper level, and a level that gives you the space to connect almost on an otherworldly space. Am I hearing that correctly?
Well, yes, except I care to keep it real. So sometimes it's otherworldly,
Mhm.
but sometimes it's very this worldly.
Ooh, say more about this.
Well, that's the thing about, I mean, heart centered emotional intimacy can be really extraordinary and otherworldly, we'll say. But I think the thing that, there are a few things actually, but one of the things that really turns me on about my work is that it has to include the body. And the thing about high performing, well, everyone, but particularly women, where we have all kinds of responsibilities at home and at work, and we're ambitious and we learn and we keep track of things, and like, there, never mind a 3 ring circus, like a 36 ring circus, and we're recording this a few days before Christmas. Like, this is a Herculean moment for
Yes.
many mothers.
Yes.
And that can all happen in a very heady place. In fact, it usually does. That's how we ignore what's happening in us below the neck unless there's pain or illness or something, because we just go into our head in order to figure things out, think things through, get things done. That is the place where that happens. And so life coaching, mindset work, these are all very, very important, profoundly important. And when it comes to romantic intimacy, sensuality, sexuality, those are things that happen in the body. I can have the most extraordinary conversation with my husband, but if we're going to have sex, if we're going to make love, if we're going to have an erotic adventure, our bodies have to be included. And one of the main things that distinguishes the nourishing, connecting, meaningful sexual experience and the more functional experience is whether or not we're fully present to the experience and in our bodies. And so this is certainly true of physicians, but it's true of women in tech and executives, and for that matter, women who clean homes. Like, whatever it is that we are doing in order to be successful, we learn to ignore our bodies. We learn to ignore when we're hungry. We learn to ignore when we have to urinate. We learn to ignore when we're sad because we don't want to lose it in front of our children. Like, whatever normal, natural experience is happening in the body, if we don't have the capacity to override that, we don't get good grades, we don't work long hours pushing through when we're tired. Like, our a typical woman's life is an exercise in ignoring her body in order to be functional in all of the ways that she cares about, which is exactly the opposite of what is needed to be able to breathe deeply and honor the energy and sensations arising in the body in the way that whether you're going to have a slow, savoring, sensual experience or even a quickie, either way, like just bang it out, if I can put it that way, that whatever it is, if you're not actually present to the experience, it's just not pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to it feels like a duty, a marital duty. And if your mind is wandering, if you're thinking about what, packing school lunches or something even more interesting, or what you're going to do, like if your mind is on anything other than the experience, then it is your invitation to come into your body. And so there are all kinds of, and we can go in a lot of different directions with this, but there are all kinds of things that impede nourishing sex in a marriage. And one of them is women not being at ease and specifically able to pivot out of doing and thinking and responsibility mode into the timelessness and ease of being in the body. That's one of the things that gets in the way.
What that brings up as I'm thinking of what you're saying is sex has been around since the beginning, right?
Yes.
But
As long as the species has
right,
been here.
exactly, and we always, as women, we've always been an element of humanity that's needed to be doers. We're not sit and watchers. And so my question, I suppose, is when do you think this became a problem such that we even have to talk about it in these terms, that people don't even necessarily realize that that's part of the issue to finding their fulfillment with in their marriage and with their partner? And I don't know that I can pinpoint a date, so I'm curious. What do you think on that?
You know, I I think I stopped keeping track at a certain point, but I'm sure I've been interviewed over 400 times. Maybe, I don't know if I'm at 500 yet. And I have never been asked this question. And let me just say right off the bat that this is conjecture. Like, I have a lot of confidence and conviction about what I talk about
Mhm.
and my response. I'm going to just think it through out loud. I think it's a really meaningful question. And I think there are different degrees. So, honestly, one of the first places that I go is that the shift, I I don't know exactly how this correlates in terms of the timeline with the biblical perspective, so I'm not going to address that one way or the other. But in the shift from matriarchal societies to patriarchal societies, the because the matriarchal societies existed for a very long time. We don't know that much about it because it's not part of the matriarchal society to um, build structures and keep timelines and so forth. But one of the things we do know, I think this is in Asia maybe, that one of the very first moves from the matriarchal society to the patriarchal society is the enslavement of animals. So, whereas before, I guess maybe the way that we might be familiar with Native Americans and indigenous populations who interact with animals with a deep respect, and yes, they still eat meat or fish or whatever, but there's a kind of fundamental synergy rather than a mastery over the creatures. But as soon as, for example, um, animals were used to till the fields and yoked and kept in a barn, and um, I think you know what I mean. That
Yeah.
when society started to essentially overpower animals,
Mhm.
that is the beginning of patriarchal societies. It's with a power dynamic that's reflected over the animals, and I think as soon as that happens, then humans become numb because we are treating other creatures with a, inflicting pain to train them to do what we want them to do, like training a colt or a foal or branding cows, or I'm not speaking as a farmer, but that there's a way in which we create a kind of internal separation in those moments. So that's one answer, but
Yeah.
let me fast forward, um, because I feel like in every era we could talk about how this played out in the times of the Greeks and in the times of the Romans and so forth. But if we fast forward to modern times, I think there's, insofar as this is a kind of evolving reality and our cultural norms have evolved much more rapidly than our physiological evolution to adjust and thrive in these contexts, then the next really significant moment is the Industrial Revolution, particularly where uh, both men and women go from a home centered life with um, a kind of natural rhythm, waking with the sun, going to bed with the sun. I don't want to romanticize it. It was
It's hard
hard work,
work.
but yeah, but um, more of a kind of natural existence. And when I talk about a natural existence, what's significant about that is it means that we are attuned to our own needs and our own experiences and work with them, to working in factories, which was just not something that we were built for, to be in a closed, ill lit, damp environment for 10, 12 hours, before there were any kinds of regulations put in for minimum age of worker and maximum number of hours per day and even instituting weekends that didn't exist. Like, all of that was an exercise. I mean, there are many, many things about the Industrial Revolution, but in the context of our conversation, all of that was an exercise in people ignoring their physical and emotional experiences and pushing through in order to be productive. I think um, anyone with slave ancestry has in their DNA the overriding of their physical and emotional well-being in order to be productive. And then we can fast forward. This makes me think of those like timelines throughout history, but through this particular lens, I think there's something that happens in the 1950s. I mean, first there's World War II, and then women's lives changed so much as they went to work. But then, after cultivating these capacities, they need to put so much back in the closet and like make previously expressed aspects dormant. I mean, I'm sure for some women that was wonderful and for some women that wasn't, but with what was expected of women in the 1950s, that also is an exercise in being somewhat attuned to our needs and identities and also overriding them in order to look pretty and have dinner ready at 5 p.m. when the husband comes home. And um, I don't know how much you want to keep going with this, but I think there's something that then happens in the 60s in this regard, and something else that happens in the 70s, which, by the way, it's in the 70s that divorce rates peaked in the US, and they've been coming down since then, although the rate of marriage has gone way down, so it's difficult to evaluate the statistics. But anyway, I think the thing that I really want to say, unless you have a particular comment or response, is that while all of this is true for individuals and society at large in different ways, starting with prehistoric times and certainly into modern times, this just is a time to then express my method, which is reflected in the title of my book, Uncompromising Intimacy, because the real block in romantic relationships, in marriage, in my opinion, is compromise, which is another way of talking about what we've already been talking about. Because far and away, the most common relationship advice that is given, if you want a good marriage, you have to be good at compromise. But in the context of our conversation right now, I want to point out that compromise is basically ignoring or overriding or putting aside a need, a desire, an internal experience that you're having.
Mhm.
And so I think that compromise is great if what you want is a bland companionship. I think when I talked about having a functional marriage, that that was putting into play the wisdom of the advice of compromise.
Mhm.
But if what you want is a dynamic, growth oriented, erotically expansive, deeply fulfilling partnership, compromise just won't give you that. And part of that is because I think of compromise as essentially withholding parts of who you are so that your partner is more comfortable. So this isn't happening in the broad strokes of society like we were talking about, and it's not happening in the professional setting. I mean, it may also be in both of those settings, but specifically with the individual that you share a home and a bed with, that compromise is really withholding parts of yourself so he is more comfortable. So you don't have to deal with his shutdown or anger or any of that. It's easier to just not say what you want or where you want to live or where you want to go for dinner or what color you want to paint the living room. Now, in any given marriage, maybe that is your domain to decide. But the point is that when we compromise, we may end up with something that he doesn't want either, but we are just overriding our own internal truths. In contrast, when I talk about uncompromising intimacy, I don't mean uncompromising in the sense that I'm going to be uncompromising and everything needs to be my way or it's not going to work. No, that's not a relationship. But insofar as compromise is withholding so that your partner is more comfortable, uncompromising intimacy is built through finding self expression, self awareness, and sharing with your spouse what is real and true for you, what you desire, what your challenges are, how you wish things would be, whatever is true inside you. And the key is learning to share those things in a way that your partner can receive and ideally opens up to you. And to tie our very broad conversation together, I want to say that more self awareness leading to more self expression is the thing that creates the emotional intimacy and the rich foundation and nourishing experience within marriage that then makes connecting sexually so much easier and more rewarding.
It's beautifully said. I have so many rabbit trails we could go down. One thing that wove through your conversation, I'll use the word compromise. As I was listening to you, I found myself thinking, I wonder why. So, certainly, we acknowledge that women are often told you're selfish if you say what you want. Putting that aside, though, there has to have been other generations that recognize these patterns. And there's books and, as you said, poetry. There's all sorts of documentation to relationships that were very intimate and were very close and were very vulnerable in their honesty and transparency with each other. And I think about that and I wonder, how did we lose that from generation to generation? Was it simply history and cultures and religion all colliding, or was it less intentional? And why does it matter? Well, I want to know, what do I do different with my daughter? Right? What do I do with different with my marriage? Because if we don't create, not only just the knowledge is great, but if we don't share it with the next generation, there's going to be a loss there, is there not? Am I thinking about that wrong?
Okay, well, first of all, one of the things that is most gratifying for me in my work is when a couple is really thriving with one another in ways that are observable and in ways that happen in private. The children feel it. When it comes to relationships, our primary mode of learning is through emulation. One second. It's good we're recording, then you can delete
Yes,
that.
no worries.
It's through the modeling that's provided. It's not like learning calculus or analytical anything, medication dosing. No, when it comes to relationships, the primary way that we learn is through modeling. So and for some women who are like, whatever, this is the motivating thing. Like, if you want your daughter not to be in this dilemma, then it is your job to really learn how to enliven your own life and your own marriage. That is the way it gets passed on, first of all. But I think in your question, there's a false assumption.
Okay.
Because, yes, there are poets and incredible examples of the kind of richness we're talking about. Those were very rare and happened on the fringes of society. So one of my very favorite movies, let's see, what is it called? I'm going to have to tell you. It's about Veronica Franco. I can't think of it right this second because
Okay.
I'm focused on talking, but I'll tell you the movie and we can maybe put the link in the show notes, but it is an incredible movie about a woman in Venice in the 1600s, a poet.
Mhm.
And the only way for her to really be alive in the ways that we're talking about is to become a courtesan,
Mm.
which is not a prostitute. Prostitute, someone who's paid for sex. The courtesans were the only ones allowed in the libraries where the men went to study. The only ways to actually study in 1600 Italy as a woman was as a nun or a courtesan. The other women were not allowed into these incredible libraries. So, and I think even poets and artists, that is not mainstream. I don't think there's ever been a time since patriarchal societies have been um, dominating that what we're talking about was the norm and then it was eroded. I think that there are the very rare, incredible marriages that have these kinds of experiences and it gets passed down in an unspoken way. But yeah.
Is this the movie? I don't know if we're talking about the same one, but the she basically swallows a whole banana in front of the wife of her lover or something.
Yes.
I can't remember the
Yes.
name either, but you're describing
I'm
it.
gonna
It
look
is
it
one of
up.
my favorite movies as well. I'm like, this is amazing. It's and she like goes on trial, and then they all stand up for her, and even the cardinal or the
Yes,
pope or whoever has to
exactly. But
acknowledge.
but the Dangerous Beauty, that's
Yes,
what it's called.
it is a good movie. It
Dangerous
is
Beauty is
fantastic.
just an amazing, amazing movie that kind of is a beautiful, gorgeous scenery, incredible narrative
Yes.
that addresses so many of the themes that we've been talking
Mhm.
about. My favorite line from the movie is, "You have to know pleasure in order to give pleasure."
Mm.
And that relates to our conversation in that if you want if you want to be part of experiencing pleasure, that is in such a big way something internal that is happening between you and your own body.
Mhm.
And I think so often this is part of the societal conditioning too, that consciously and unconsciously we as women are taught that our sensuality and sexuality, we might enjoy it, that's great, but it's for our husbands.
Mhm.
And that just needs to be disrupted. Yes, it's for our husbands, but it's much more for us. It's our bodies.
Mhm. Yeah, being able to even talk about that openly. I think growing up in a fairly homogenous geographic area where we this didn't come up at church, for example, and even if it did, it was always in the sense of honor your husband, whatnot, and we should honor all people. I agree.
Actually, I just want to interject
Yeah.
something because I think one of the biggest disservices done by the church in this regard is this, that girls are taught not to have any attention whatsoever on sensuality, sexuality, that is just the antithesis of purity culture. And
Yes.
any girl who would even be interested in this conversation,
Mhm.
there's something wrong with her. She
Right.
is less than and impure. And so the most amazing girl who grows up and goes through adolescence and whatever age she gets to before getting married, she is not putting attention on any of these things. Then she gets married, and nobody says so, but that wedding is supposed to be the most potent alchemical transformational experience, such that when she goes to bed that evening with her husband, she's supposed to be alive in her body and
Hmm.
present and
Know
open to
all the things.
pleasure.
Yep.
And yes, know her own body and know how to interact with his and not be shut down or scared, which
Yes.
is the natural consequence of having turned away from this realm so completely prior to marriage. And I think that this is a real um, a real problem in church communities, that the woman before marriage who's admired really is not equipped to be a wonderful marriage and all a wonderful wife in all of the ways, and the woman who might be a lot more equipped because she's been thinking about it, she's been reading romance novels and noticing there's tingling in her body when she reads it and so forth, that she ends up being so shamed before that magical wedding, in which case she then has more to offer. And I think that this is just a terrible travesty for girls and women who actually want to honor their husbands and honor themselves in ways that really are elusive in the context of what I've just said.
I mean, it's unfair to the men too, because they're setting the
For sure.
expectation they're going to have this. So, um,
And it also means it puts so much responsibility on the men to be Prince Charming in the bedroom, to
mhm,
be like the prince who comes and gives Sleeping Beauty one kiss and it
mhm,
fully awakens her. But
right,
he's not supposed to know enough to be skillful either.
right, right. 100% agree with you. So, one of the reasons I brought that up is for all the reasons you just explained, I can blame lack of knowledge on my upbringing there. But what I find astonishing, and may I even use the word distressing, is that I didn't learn it in medical school either. And so if we're taking our people who are supposed to know our bodies the most, our physicians, nurses, etc., and they're not having these conversations at the level because they may not have experienced themselves, no one else has taught them, we're really spinning a wheel of just repeating the same mistakes, it seems. But you're interjecting there. You're saying, no, this is what I'm going to do differently.
Well, I guess I just want to say that I have sympathy. I have sympathy for the completely dysfunctional system. And the reason that I have sympathy is because I I listened and paid attention every opportunity there was for any kind of clinical instruction about sex and sexuality. And the thing is that most of the time, when it is done according to the objectivity and research priorities and evidence based science, any of the studies and the description of what they study, it does not seem like they are talking about sex. It is so profoundly dehydrated, and we
Yes.
want we want our medical professionals to be professional. And so it's very complicated. There are additional issues which have been increasing in recent times, which is just the overall um, like dysfunctional prudishness, such that there really is only one or possibly two, I'm not sure, but there are very few labs in the US who get any funding to study sex. I mean, Masters and Johnson, that was in the 50s. Their lab, the Kinsey's Institute, still exists, but the best research on sex and sexuality is done in Canada, where it's done very professionally and it is well funded. But that is sort of this is like a many layered problem. And one of
Yeah.
the things has to do with professionalism. The other thing is that, the Eskimos, the Inuits have like 13 different words for snow because based on their experience, they differentiate snow in all kinds of ways. I mean, we have snow, we have slush, but just they differentiate different kinds of snow. The ancient Egyptians had like 40 different words for heavens because their whole mythology and theology had so many different flavors when it comes to the heavens. Okay, so why am I saying this? Because we have a massive linguistic problem, a massive linguistic handicap, because we don't have ways to talk about our experiences. I mean, tingling, warmth, like we can find juicy words, but we do not have codified descriptions of what we would be studying. So we can, I guess my point is that when it comes to medicine, we can study physiological responses, and that isn't studied enough and isn't taught enough. But it's not just the objective physiology. We want to know how it actually feels and what is happening to our souls. And there's something inherently in the medical model as it has been, which doesn't honor the subjectivity of these experiences. That on the one hand. On the other hand, sexual medicine is a growing field, and there are more and more doctors who really are talking about this in a way that is not pornographic, is not like filled with inappropriate innuendos that you would never want your doctor to be having, but is no longer as dehydrated and boring as it used to be either. So, sexual medicine is definitely a growing field. However, I don't do sexual medicine. I am really focused on the qualities of intimacy, which includes sexual medicine, but is not at all restricted to that. It is like way beyond the body. I think of the work that I do as a kind of intersection of coaching, leadership, sexuality, and relationality. A lot of my teachers, in fact, I haven't had really any physician teachers for the work that I do. Um, a lot of my teachers have been pretty far out, people that I never thought I would spend any time with, people who are not standard responsible citizens because they are honoring their feelings and their sensations and not focused on ambition or earning money. Like, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and this training program that I was just describing was in San Francisco, in just an area with a lot of hippies and people who were doing all kinds of exploration and therefore had a lot for me to learn. And then I would go home to the suburbs with my white picket fence and take care of my 4 children. I don't think any of the other students were married with children. Some had children, but they did not have the kind of conventional, mainstream, stable marriage that I appear to have. And I do, but I feel like one of the big gifts that I got was learning from people who never would have a voice in a medical curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew I had something to learn, and it was very uncomplicated for me to learn from them because I could easily take whatever was taught and translate it into a suburban marriage. And I feel like this is one of the big gifts and missions that I have, is to take wisdom from fringe people and share it in a very coherent mainstream way that educated normal people are very glad to receive.
Mm-hmm. Who wouldn't have necessarily gone to those fringe experiences either.
100% would
Yeah.
not.
And to be able to learn from everyone is something that we will often say we want to do, but very few of us will act upon that and with the intention that you have. I have,
Right. Like I'm just going to give a very specific
yes,
example because like in medical school, I learned nothing about the clitoris.
right.
And I certainly grew up with in a family where, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, I knew boys had penises, and I never learned the word for any female genitalia. It was just like
Mm.
linguistically invisible and therefore invisible in my consciousness. I knew pee came out of somewhere,
Yeah.
that's about as far as it went. But um again, in medical school, I re- I have no idea if the clitoris was on in my gross anatomy curriculum or not, but I have zero memory of it. It's the sort of thing that might have been a little titillating and therefore memorable. But anyway, I didn't learn anything about it anywhere else. But when I learned from this one particular teacher who had mapped the clitoris like a clock with 12 parts, and like the 1 o'clock spot has particular kinds of sensations, and the 2 o'clock spot has particular kinds of sensations. I won't go all the way through the
Mm-hmm.
clocks, but when I became a student of hers, I had no capacity to distinguish. Like, if when I experimented some of the things I was learning with my husband, quite frankly, if he didn't have a lot of pressure with his finger, I didn't know if he was touching my clitoris or not. It was all just kind of one amorphous responsive area.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now I know immediately if he's at the 6 o'clock spot or the 8 o'clock spot because they feel different to me.
Mm.
And so part of what we're talking about is education in terms of dropping shame and allowing safe, meaningful exploration. And part of what we're talking about is literally each particular woman experimenting with her own body, so that the same way that your eyelashes and, you know, any contours in your lips that from putting lip gloss on, like, where how things are shaped with a kind of specificity, or when you brush your hair, you're attuned to how it lies. Like, we get to have that level of detail and kind of specificity in our relationship with our genitals too, because they have so much to offer us.
And that is probably the one place our listeners don't want us to stop. So we will have to have you come back to talk more about that cliffhanger, everyone. But thank you for being here today. If our listeners do want to get in touch with you, how do you want them to do so?
Okay, well, I have a few answers to that question. The first one is alexandrastockwell.com. That's my website, my hub, where you can find a link to my book, Uncompromising Intimacy, my own podcast, the Intimate Marriage Podcast, all of my programs and blogs and so forth. And the other thing that I want to say is that if you're still listening, it means you've been interested in our conversation up until this moment. And I want to encourage you to get my online course, Desires. It is short, easy, inexpensive, and it will guide you to essentially wake up parts of yourself that have been dormant. It's mostly not about sex, it is more about your relationship to yourself, to your desires, giving yourself permission to feel them, learning to ask for what you want so it feels really good to give it to you, as opposed to being demanding or critical. It This is a conversation that really all women should have with themselves. So that is alexandrastockwell.com/desires.
All right. I am delighted to have had you here, Dr. Stockwell. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us and your experiences. We will look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you so much.